Welcome to It's Your Life with host Joyce Wheeler, who will empower you to live a happy, healthy, natural life.
You're listening to Haggy Shack Radio at haggyshack.com.
Welcome. You are listening to It's Your Life, Live It to the Fullest. I am your host, Joyce Wheeler. Today is Friday, July 22nd, 2016. Tonight, my guest is Kathleen DiChiara, and she is an educator, health advocate, and mother of three. Kathleen broke into the field of nutrition to uncover the root cause of her own disease. She went from competing in triathlons and working in capital markets at a Fortune 500 company to becoming completely disabled at age 35. At the same time, her son was diagnosed with autism. Today, Kathleen shares her story of hope, recovery, and resilience. Her son formally lost his autism diagnosis at age 11, and their dramatic story of recovery is featured in the soon-to-be-released documentary film, Secret Ingredients. Kathleen is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, certified health coach, and bio-individual nutrition practitioner with specialized training in the biochemistry and specialized diets for autism, allergies, autoimmune, and other chronic conditions. She is an international speaker, the founder of Road to Health Incorporated and Direct Nutrition Support, and the author of the best-selling book, The Hidden Connection. Welcome, Kathleen.
Hi, Joyce. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here. You've got this FDN-P after your name with the BNI-P after your name and a CHC. What do all those stand for? What's the F?
So,
P?
Functional diagnostic nutrition is what that stands for. And, the other one is Bio-Individual Nutrition Institute, and the other one is Certified Health Coach, and there's probably about 4 or 5 others, which I don't include. But essentially, I like to get a broad range of information, and for me, it's more important for me to seek out the type of information that I think moves me forward as opposed to gathering information for the sake of certain credentials. So I'm pretty unique in the sense that I like to go out and go after a unique arrangement of studies. And I think at this point, I'll probably just eventually go on to get my PhD because I have such a love for learning. But yeah, so it's mostly, most of it is around the biochemistry and the functional components of the body. So looking at hormones and metabolic function and looking at how nutrition is affecting the biochemistry of the body and understanding how the system works and how it's working in connection with its environment. So that's my particular interest. I do a lot of specialty study too in bacteria and viruses in the immune system and looking at allergies and histamine reactions and sort of understanding the chemistry of what's happening in the body. So I have really an insatiable curiosity for how things happen. It's not enough for me to get an explanation. I have to really understand why. It's just the way that I learn. But it has served me well so far, so I'm going to keep going on that path.
I just want to tell them a little bit about how we met. Back in April, well, actually it was May 2015, we were looking to do our first magazine, It's Your Life Mag, and it was due to come out in April. April is Autism Awareness Month, and I had this idea that I wanted to do an article in there on autism, and I knew that there were various people who had helped their children overcome autism. And I decided I don't want to just write an article. I want to interview someone. So I searched, and through various connections that I have, I was able to meet Kathleen, which has been a real pleasure meeting her and to hear about all the wonderful work that she's doing and how she's helping people all over the place to overcome various health issues. So, Kathleen, can you share with us a little bit about your background on how you got into doing all of this?
Sure. I mean, first I'd like to say, Joyce, too, that thank you for taking the time to host a show and do a magazine. And these things require a lot of effort and persistence. And I think a lot of people would like to do what you're doing. And then there are the select few that actually take those action steps. So it's really an honor for me to always be your guest, because I really appreciate people like you who want to bring information for free to the community and to get people engaged in a conversation that, will allow them to move forward and to have the life that they want to have or that they deserve. And I think it's really great that you do that. So thank you for that. In terms of my background, I just, as I said, I was in capital markets. I had majored in English, and then I got into capital markets and investment relations. And I loved my job. I had a great job and was there, almost 10 years. And my husband and I, we had a great marriage, and we had 2 little boys, and we had recently bought a new house, and things seemed to be going, as they would. I had been competing in triathlons before I had the boys, recreationally. So we were always pretty dedicated to healthy living. My husband was an all-natural bodybuilder, and which he also did recreationally. So we were very aware of health. We were had every intention on raising healthy children, and we exercised, and we ate all whole grains and low-fat foods and all the things that, I suppose now, in looking back, the media had told us was healthy, right? So we were getting our information much like the average person today, which is fad diets and bad articles in magazines. And but anyway, we were really, we were physically fit, so we didn't really see what we were doing as being a problem, except that when I had developed a sudden onset neuropathy in my legs, it really did come out of nowhere. I had lost the feeling in my left leg, and I was having trouble walking on it, and I kept laying down at the office because I was having trouble. It started with low back pain that accelerated pretty quickly. And then I think after 3 days after the first sensation of low back pain, I couldn't even get from my bed to the shower to leave for work. Wow. So I couldn't walk at all. And it was really shocking because I just had never had anything progress that quickly, and I didn't really know what it was. And that was the last time I never went back to work after that. It had progressed very aggressively. I tried 6 months of physical therapy, and it was only getting worse, and I lost the ability to lift my foot, at which point I had multiple, medical appointments and evaluations, and was told that, if I didn't move forward with surgery, I probably would not be able to use my left foot, permanently. So I ended up going that route, and I had what's called a laminectomy discectomy, which is just a carving of the bone to get access to the pinched nerve, essentially. And this was down in the low back L4, L5. And so they removed the compression of the nerve. And I was supposed to, get up and go through rehab and be on my way, except that when I woke up, I couldn't walk at all. So that was, I guess, the beginning of, something very, very different for me. They didn't sever the nerves, which of course we ruled out with an MRI. And there's very little there is a medical term for it, which is like it's like post-traumatic stress disorder of the central nervous system. Essentially the limbs kind of shut down, and it can last days or weeks or years, and it can be intermittent. And for me it was many, many months. And then even when I did regain the ability to walk, I had a severe limp. And I ended up having to wear a body brace from my ribs to my hips. But that was also the beginning of other autoimmune-like conditions. I became allergic to everything. I had body rashes, headaches. I had restless leg syndrome. I was put on narcotics for chronic pain syndrome. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed with degenerative facet joint syndrome, which is basically the facet joints in the spinal cord are deteriorating. I had multiple MRIs and CAT scans. I was told I had a spinal hemangioma, which is a benign tumor in the middle of the spine, another herniated disc in the neck, neuropathy, again in my legs and arms, and then I started losing vision and was told I was in early stages of MS. So this obviously, every appointment, it wasn't overnight, it was gradual, and I just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and I couldn't figure out how to help myself. And I think, I remember vividly the day, that I essentially said to, I think I remember asking my husband, if he ever had a feeling inside, like a strong, I call it a burning sensation. It was like a gut, an intuitive feeling, that something was not right or that I was supposed to do something different. And he was like, no, you mean a nervousness kind of like before a sporting event? And I was like, no, something different. And he said, no, I've never had that feeling. And that was kind of the turning point for me. I just decided that I was going to die. If I kept going this route, I was on way too much morphine. I was really afraid, that I just my body wouldn't hold up, over the long term. And it was within 6 months of my, disability diagnosis. So I was put on permanent disability for life, and told that I would, get Social Security till the age of 65 because I just wasn't getting well. And surgery was no longer an option to me because I had already proved that I was not a good candidate. That's when my son was diagnosed with autism. So he was 3 at the time, and I also had an 18-month-old. So it was an intense time of suffering for us. And, I think a lot of families go through it too, and people don't really talk about it. I think that we have the tendency to see everyone's highlight reel, and, we see that people are happy and, putting on, a good game face. But the reality is that many people are sick. And we were that family. We were sick. We were trying our best. We were trying to figure things out, and we weren't getting the results. And we certainly had good doctors and had good therapists and people had good intentions, but I think because the medical system was really designed for acute care, it's become a chronic care management system. And so that's essentially what we were doing. We were managing chronic disease, using the healthcare system. So using pharmaceuticals and therapies and lots of appointments, but we weren't getting better. And that was the area of frustration for me because I thought I'm too young. My son is young. We're really trying. So we're willing, to make changes and do things. And why can't I find information that's helpful? And why can't I get results? And I was going to, the best of the best, and I was making trips and long distance trips and traveling up to Boston to see some of the best doctors. And every time I left an appointment, I would be in tears because again, it was more humiliation, more of the same, more of it is what it is, your disease is what it is, learn to live with it kind of an attitude. Wow. And so I thought, this is just ridiculous. So, I don't know what it is that makes somebody say that they're not going to take it anymore or they're going, but I definitely remember having the feeling. And so I just started studying on my own. I just said, well, there has to be another way. And I just started looking at research and looking things up and pulling research and looking up nutrition. And are there things that I can do in my own home that are not costly that, I could potentially be helpful. And I took a few online courses in herbology and I was like really just kind of curious. And it was just like an explosion of data. I mean, there was just no shortage of data. Scientific data, not, I wasn't looking at blogs. I mean, I was looking in PubMed at research. I was looking at really, strong, clinical information that in fact there was a correlation between, chronic disease and nutrition, and there were therapeutic foods and there were things that people were getting results. And certainly we were seeing, a lot of the compounds and properties in foods had, a lot of healing, mechanisms to them. So that was it. That's all I needed. I was just, hungry, literally, for it, for the information. And I just kept going and going and looking and looking and looking. And then that's when it dawned on me, with Stephen, like what I wonder if not to undo autism or to change him in any way. I didn't really see that as being a potential. That wasn't even on my radar that, autism had some, medical underpinnings to it. So I just thought, well, how can he live his best life? But, what will that look like? And are there things that I'm doing that are creating inflammation in his body, that are affecting his brain? Are there things that I'm not doing? Are there nutrients that he needs that I'm just not even giving to him? And so I got really curious about that, and it just went on and on from there. I don't want to keep going without taking a breath in case you want to ask me a question, Joyce, but that was essentially how I got, involved in my love of nutrition.
Yeah, the one question I'm curious about, the one thing that I was asked about with the article in the magazine was, like, on a scale from 1 to 10 with his autism, what would you rate it?
I don't rate what? Say that again.
Your son's autism.
Oh, how severe?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a good question because autism is obviously a spectrum disorder. I will just say this. He, it's all relative to the individual, right? So, I could call it a 10 and somebody else who has a child who's profoundly autistic might call it a 5. So I don't really like to put those numbers because it's all relative to what the individual family can handle. Stephen, was 3 at the time, and he had already had multiple diagnostic labels. So he had a speech disorder, apraxia of the mouth, apraxia of the body, a sensory processing disorder, selective mutism, so he was nonverbal. He had a panic disorder, severe anxiety, cognitive delays, slow processing speed. And, so he was, he had a lot going. That was before the autism diagnosis. So, I think that, and I've worked a lot in the special needs community for a long time. And so I used to run support groups, and I led, as a president and chair of the board, a nonprofit, in Rhode Island that serves 40,000 individuals with special health care needs and deals with, policy, special ed, and advocacy. So I'm very, very aware of all levels of autism. The unique part of Stephen's issue was that he was nonverbal and he was essentially shut down. So he was a kid that people didn't mind being around, or adults didn't see any problems with because he wasn't acting out. He didn't have rage or violence. But he, it took us an hour to leave the house. It took 40 minutes for him to have a bowel movement. He couldn't wear certain clothes. We had to get dressed for at least 2 hours. We had to take the socks off 12 times. He couldn't, communicate. So we had to use a picture-based, and he made up his own sign language at home. So and we did a lot of therapy. We did occupational therapy, sensory therapy, water therapy, speech and language therapy. He got those privately. He got early intervention in the home, and he got services at school. So it was like a full-time job, essentially, servicing him. So I think at different levels and different times, he had a different range of complexity. But I think that, his challenges were quite significant, and he met all of the criteria for the autism spectrum disorder when he was diagnosed. So
you were dealing with all of his health issues while still dealing with your own health issues, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And then our youngest son at the time, we now have a third son, but, we had another 18-month-old, and he had bronchitis and, had food allergies and a distended belly and had other, more upper respiratory issues that at the time just didn't seem that important. I think I think this is the other issue that I like to bring up to your listeners, which is, by the time, fast forward many, many years later, and I look back, and as you mentioned in the introductory, there's a documentary film coming out which is recapping all of the issues that our family went through. But essentially, we had 21 chronic diseases in our family of 5. And what I like to point out to people is that none of these, like, everything creeps up. It's sort of like you deal with it or you're managing it, and then there's something else is going on and you just deal with that, and you see them as separate issues. But it's not as if you make a list. I think if every family member, or if every mother in America just sat down and made a list of all of the things that every member of their family might be struggling with, whether it's headaches or sleep problems or endocrine disruption or acne and eczema and psoriasis and joint pain and mood disorders and learning disabilities and on and on and on. I think that we forget, and we don't look at it collectively, as like we're all one unit, all 5 of us. And so even though he was having bronchitis and upper respiratory issues and, my other son was having developmental disabilities and other challenges, and I was struggling with chronic health issues, and my husband had psoriasis and then eventually developed a what's called gynecomastia in men, which is a benign breast tumor. We just kept seeing them as individual issues, and then we just sort of dealt with them as they came, which is really what there's no other way to do it. But I think now being, in a different place, I often encourage people to kind of look at that, like to step back as if you are, the head of this community, and you look at all those family members and you say, what's really going on here? What are we all dealing with? And then what are the things that we can do in our own home that can work towards supporting or potentially undoing, some of those conditions that might be nutritionally or lifestyle induced. So I think it's really important that people take a step back and look at all the things going on, to get hyper-focused on the severely disabled person.
You have a question. Actually, it's a 2-part question. Mm-hmm. And this question might come because actually, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I had Dr. Andrew Wakefield was on. Mm-hmm. So we had talked, I know you're familiar with.
Yeah.
The question is, the first question is, like I said, it's 2 parts. Do you know if there are recorded cases of autism prior to vaccines, and also, or any autistic diagnosis for any who haven't had vaccines?
Yeah, I don't know the statistics of the relationship between.
No, just recorded cases.
Yeah, no, I don't, and I don't think anybody is gathering that at this time. Somebody might be gathering it. I'm not aware of any statistical data on those numbers. I think that what people have to think about when it comes to autism is that it's not just one cause. There is no single relationship.
Right.
That, autism is a very complex medical issue, and it can have a wide range of triggering events. It can have a wide range of contributing events. It can have a wide range of what I would call vulnerabilities. So I like to look at the individual vulnerability and what leads to somebody potentially having issues. I can look back at my pregnancy with Stephen, and I know immediately many things that happened prior to pregnancy, during my pregnancy, medical treatments that I was given, and then things that happened prior. So there's no way for me to pinpoint a single incident that led to that. And that doesn't mean that there aren't children, that have had medical interventions, whether it's a vaccine or other treatments that may have induced trauma to the body or potentially led to, the diagnosis. That was not a single experience for us. So do I think that Stephen had reactions to his vaccines? Yes, of course he did. He was covered in rashes. I had to take him to the hospital on a couple of occasions. There were definitely things happening in his body that, in hindsight, I can see now were not normal. But he was already struggling. There were things already going wrong for him. He had motor planning issues. He was not crawling. He was not babbling. He was not turning over. He had severe colic and digestive distress. He was in distress in utero. I was induced at 35 weeks because he was in distress and his heart rate was dropping. So, I think that we really, I would caution people to, not get into trying to make individual links an issue like autism, because I think it is very complex, and I think it has a lot of, there are a lot of things going into that people have to be aware of, but not in any way to diminish people's concerns, because they're all valid, I think.
Right, I agree. We, definitely, from the research that I have done on autism, we can't pinpoint one particular thing, but we do know that vaccines do trigger in certain children. I believe it's in their DNA that causes them to, maybe it was laying there dormant. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was something there that was dormant. Like when I had Dr. Wakefield on, it was mentioned that when they were given the MMR vaccine especially was known to trigger autism within children. And it was also mentioned that children who had Lyme disease that was in their body that was dormant, it was known to trigger that, to bring that out. So,
well, I think that I think, Joyce, you're bringing up an interesting point, and that is that, our bodies are very complex and the systems are complex. Yes. And we don't have a looking glass to see, who can tolerate what, and then what pre-existing things are in the body that would potentially make somebody vulnerable. So when I'm talking about vulnerability, right, I am talking about a previous antibiotic use. I'm talking about the microbiome of the mother and what she handed down to the baby. Can the baby withstand certain environmental things? I mean, I have 3 boys, and I did not have 3 boys with autism, and many of the choices that I made were the same. My boys did get vaccinated, and so, one would argue that, why didn't they all develop it? And the reality is that none of us are the same. None of us.
Right.
And so,
right. Exactly.
And all things, food is affecting us all differently. Lyme disease or viral infections, co-infections, viruses are all affecting us differently. We have this incredible microbiota inside of us and this bacterial kingdom, which is unique to each of us. Even identical twins is the one thing that is uniquely different between both, which is why you can have one identical twin become obese and one be thin. And that is because right, their microbiome, which is driving their metabolic function, and their weight is unique to them. It is not the same. And so I think that when people want to think about immunity and health and vulnerability and the things that make us vulnerable, I would argue that we need to, rather than try to look at the individual assaults to the body, whether it's a vaccine or a food or a pesticide or an antibiotic or a virus or a toxic exposure or a trauma or poor health from the mother or drugs or whatever the influence is that essentially weakens the body, we can't really undo those things. So let's think about how we can build resilience in the body. How can we make the body healthy? And even in Stephen's case, I was not trying to undo anything. I knew that many things had happened and led up to his vulnerability, and then I made multiple choices along the way that I think probably were detrimental to him. But rather than say, how do I go back and erase these, 4 or 5 years from his life, or how do I undo those actions? I knew that that was an impossibility. So I just said, well, based on where he is today and what the capacity of his body today, how do I make him stronger? What are the things that I can do to make him more resilient? Because I also knew that the body was self-healing. I knew that the body was regenerative. And I knew right, this because I would have been dead in my 20s. I mean, I looked back at my own life and said, with the amount of, just your own life, in the things that we sort of do to ourselves, whether it's drinking too much or partying or I had been put on lots of medications. I had other traumas during my life, that I had been put through surgeries and other medications. And I thought at this point, there's just, my body must be healing itself constantly or I would be dead. I just, in looking what I had already been through, so I knew that capacity existed. And so that was ultimately my entire focus was how do I work with what's current and what's presenting in front of me now, and how do I get myself stronger? How do I make him stronger? And how do I make sure that the body has everything it needs to rebuild and heal? And it is a different perspective. I think people are trying to fix what went wrong or fix or undo things that happened. And I think, that has, I would say it doesn't have the long-term effects that people are looking for. And I would encourage people to, consider building as opposed to undoing, if that makes sense.
No, you kind of lost me right there. Kind of like, could you elaborate on that thought, please?
Well, so if you think about it from the standpoint of, if somebody gets sick and they put their child or themselves on antibiotics, maybe for a virus or bacterial infection, and from that experience they never get better, right? They feel worse. They end up developing allergies. They end up with fibromyalgia or brain fog. I mean, this is a story that's repeated over and over again, that somebody has maybe caught a cold or an infection or multiple ear infections in kids, been put on a round of antibiotics and then another round, and then they start having developmental delays, learning challenges, eventually get an ADD or an ADHD diagnosis or something like that, right? So it's sort of this, something happened and then something develops from that later. Many people get caught up in what triggered the event, right? So what was the event? What was the single instance? It was that I was put on antibiotics and then I never got better from that. And while you can't go back and undo that, right? And so the body is never the same. It's constantly changing. Rather than have that mindset of how do I fix what I did, now that they've potentially made that connection between that instance being the beginning of the problem, look at the individual today, even if it's a year, 2, 3 years later, and say, how does the child present today? Where are the areas of dysfunction? Are they having digestive distress? Are they not going to the bathroom? Are they, how are they presenting? And then work on building a healthy body from there, as opposed to trying to undo and being upset about the incident that got them into that predicament. That's what I'm saying. I think people are not recognizing that even though you can't go back and undo that action, the body has changed constantly. It's constantly changing and evolving because we are 90% bacteria and 10% human. So our bacteria, our entire body is, for the most part, some people would argue we're 1% human and 99% bacteria. We are a microorganism that's interacting with our environment. So it means that we are constantly changing. And so we have to recognize that we have the potential to get strong at any point in our life, to get better and to heal. And we have to constantly be working with where we are today as opposed to, undoing a single action. So even in the instance of a vaccine injury, if someone has a vaccine injury, rather than trying to undo that, a lot of people think, well, I have to get toxins out of the body, or I have to clear this, or I can't do anything until I fix that problem. And I would argue, if you restore the health of the body will do that for you.
Right.
It will clear things for you because.
Right. And I think that I don't know how it sounds for the listeners or for Colleen, but you keep breaking up on me. I have to really strain to hear you.
Oh,
so I'm sorry.
Me too. That's okay.
Yeah. You go in and out. It kind of depends on where
I don't know
how I hold my head.
I don't know, Joyce. I'm not having her break up, but I'm hearing you break up a lot.
Yeah, me too.
See, now you just broke up on me.
Yeah, I think it's on your end, because Kathleen is coming through clear, no breakups at all.
Well, I don't know what to do about it. I know that we do have some weather issues here, so I don't know if that's playing a role.
It could be
in it, but I just know that I just know that because even earlier, we do this every single week, Colleen, and I've never had you break up on me, so that was kind of weird. But anyway, I'm working through it. I just have to really strain to listen to her. But sometimes I'm cutting in because I think she's done talking. So I'm not being rude. I'm just, I'm getting these breakups. So we'll work through it. It's fine.
Yeah, I think you're breaking up on me too, but we'll make it work.
Sure will. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about earlier. You were walking around and you looked the family looked all healthy and all well, like there was no problems going on. It's funny because my husband has made a comment, and I even think about it to myself. How could these people be consuming the things that they're consuming and be healthy? How is this possible? Or like my husband, he had the mercury poisoning for the amalgam fillings, and it really hit him hard. And there's other people who don't, but it's like you said, Kathleen, we're all different. Mm-hmm. Our bodies, our DNA, it's all different. Mm-hmm. I've often thought too, my kids have been vaccinated. They don't have autism, but my daughter has PCOS and sometimes I think is there a connection with that? I don't know. Or is it just, something else, like you're talking about the gut microbiome, which is very important to her health. And now she had a lot of ear infections when she was younger and was on a lot of antibiotics. And I remember one time it was so bad she ended up doing 2 rounds of antibiotics back to back.
Right.
Which we know what that does. Mm-hmm. Now for a natural antibiotic, we use oil of oregano, but oil of oregano will also destroy the good gut bacteria. So we still have to go ahead and replenish that. But I feel like I'd really use the oil of oregano than to use the antibiotic for me and for my choice. I just feel it's a much better option.
Yeah, I think with ear infections, which is interesting for families, we did not have that issue, but from the research that I've read, there is very little research to support the use of antibiotics to clear an ear infection, that in fact most ear infections clear on their own and are more predominantly driven by viruses, so which we know can't be treated with antibiotics. So.
Well, I'll tell you this. I had ear infections as a child, and that my mom never took me to the doctor to get antibiotics. There was this oil, I don't remember the name of it, that she would warm up on a stove. She would take a cotton ball, soak it in there, stick it in my ear, give me a heating pad. Before the heating pad came around, it was a hot water bottle. Yeah. And had me lay on that. But I'll tell you, it hurt like the dickens. It really, really hurt like the dickens. And, I kind of wish that she would have given me an antibiotic because it would have killed it, killed a lot faster, got rid of it a lot faster. But now, with my kids, first off, we're very rarely are we sick here. And if somebody does get sick, right away I start administering the elderberry syrup and the silver biotics. It's like, okay, everybody's taking elderberry syrup every hour on the hour to build up that immune system.
Yep.
Somebody asked, do you recommend raw garlic as a replacement for antibiotics?
So I really recommend as many real foods. I mean, there are a lot of antimicrobial and antibacterial foods, and certainly Mother Nature has provided us with a wide range of them. I think that raw garlic is very effective. It's not, the thing to remember about food as medicine, or herbs as medicine, or plants as medicine, is that they are superior to anything in the pharmaceutical industry, because everything in the pharmaceutical industry originated in nature, but then it was changed from a molecular structure so that it could be patented and sold. But It all originates, all those compounds and all medicine originated in nature, and so it is by far superior in terms of its effect. The key is to find the herb, the food, the nutrient, the antimicrobial, the antibacterial that works for you in that instance. A lot of people will try a remedy, that somebody else recommends or that they've looked up on the internet, it wasn't effective and they get frustrated. And the key is to find what is working for you and what is working for that particular ailment. And there is more than one thing that can be used. And so you have to be willing to experiment and try different things. And so garlic is just one of the many, many things that we can use. I really like plants. I use a lot of herbs. I have an herb garden in my backyard. It's very, very easy. And then you can make your own tinctures. You can make a tea. You can just use the leaf. And then I also think to the extent where you can use food medicinally, not for necessarily for acute issues. A lot of people will wait till they have an acute issue to then turn to garlic and expect garlic to be, come in like Superman. The idea is to really be using these foods all of the time and to keep bacteria and viruses at bay. So, using them throughout your life, throughout your day, throughout your week, and weaving them in and out is really what's going to keep somebody from, developing an acute issue. So.
Well, and I agree with you. Our thoughts are like yours. Let's prevent illness to begin with. I'm curious as to what other foods or herbs can we use as antibiotics, and do any of the other ones like oil of oregano actually destroy the good gut bacteria?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of using anything in high doses and anything that's too powerful or too strong. I think, again, we have to understand that, the idea is not to wipe things and destroy things out. So if we're trying to, if we have a bacterial infection or we're trying to, get well, we can bring an oil of oregano in or medicinally bring it in, but we can also restore the immune system by using adaptogenic herbs and using other types of herbs that will work with the immune system to kind of fight the body. The important thing is to really think about that the body is doing the work. It's not really the herb. So it's not that you're bringing a food in or an herb in or the oil of oregano is somehow going exactly where you want it to go. It's going right to that ear infection and killing it. More importantly, you're bringing something into the body to assist the body. So I think that that's a far more effective way to do that, because then the body can use that plant or the adaptogenic herb to regulate the immune system or upregulate it or downregulate it. Sometimes we don't want to get the immune system up and going. Sometimes the immune system is naturally being suppressed, and that's the body's natural healing mechanism. So I think what's important is to understand that we're not really doing the healing. The body is doing the healing, and we're providing that assistance. And then using a wide range of different foods. But, lots of foods can do that. Onions and garlic and cilantro and parsley are really powerful. Lemon balm is great for hormone balancing, but also has antiviral components. A lot of the antibacterial plants are also antiviral. So I think a lot of people think that they have bacterial overgrowth or bacterial infections, and they're more virus. I think the virus components of illness are much more predominant these days. So I think people are also self-diagnosing, which can lead to an issue in and of itself because they're sort of guessing what the problem is, and they think that they should be taking antibacterials when in fact antiviral is better. So I think it's really about, I prefer people to, think about building a wellness team, think about in their own community people that they can trust, that they can call upon when things come up so that people can teach them what to look for, what signs to look for. I think everybody should be working with a chiropractor. I think everyone should be working with an acupuncturist or a naturopath, even an herbologist if you have one, definitely a nutritionist. Having these people, it doesn't mean that you're seeing them all the time. It means that you have appointments with them throughout the year, once or twice. You have a relationship with them so that when things come up, you have people that you trust that you can call upon and say, this is what I'm struggling with. What are the best things that might work for me? A lot of people use homeopathic remedies very effectively. But, we can't always teach ourselves. So I'm a practitioner, so I'm well versed in a wide range of using plants and foods medicinally, but I'm not sure if I didn't have that I'd be able to figure it all out. So, and I have my own wellness team. I have all the people that I'm suggesting are on my team because I think it's important that we build that community, for our own self-care. So I think that that's better. We used to have gastroenterologists and gynecologists and, the ear, nose, and throat doctor and the primary care. And, we had sort of all of these, sick care conventional doctors, and now we have more of a holistic, team of practitioners that we call upon.
Right. And we have a couple of questions, but I want to make a comment. And I think we had mentioned, or I had mentioned this the other day when I had talked to you, is, you're right. We have to look at things that support our systems, that support our organs and keep our bodies healthy rather than wait until we get sick. But unfortunately, that does happen sometimes.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know which one to address first. I'll give them to you both at the same time, and
okay.
You can do what you want with them. One person wants to know if you healed your body and how. Another person wants to know which herbs are adaptogenic.
Oh, adaptogenic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So the list of herbs that are adaptogenic is, probably too broad to talk about, but it's a very easy thing for people to look up, and it would depend on the issue. So, rhodiola, ginseng, there's no shortage of ashwagandha is a good example of one. And then of course they have their other names for them too. So sometimes they're under different things, but there's a wide range and they have different benefits. And, I think that this is probably a really great area for people to explore and get familiar with. Astragalus, a lot of the mushrooms, goji berries, licorice root, reishi mushrooms, tulsi, which is holy basil. And the list goes on and on and on. And then, of course, also recognizing, which is why, again, I encourage people to have somebody that can kind of teach them, is like, for example, licorice root is an adaptogenic, and it will help with people who have hormone or cortisol issues. But if you have elevated cortisol and you take licorice root, then that's a problem because you're actually going to put a strain on your adrenal glands. So you also have to know what you're dealing with. And again, that's the idea of not guessing and then using the internet to self-diagnose yourself, or thinking that whatever your girlfriend had and what she used that worked for her is the right thing that you should be using. Because sometimes, you can be further setting yourself up for a problem, because you have good intentions and you're experimenting with something. And then of course, it makes matters worse. A good rule of thumb is that if you aren't feeling better, quickly, that you stop doing what you're doing. I think a lot of people think that you need to push through, or you're just having a healing reaction. And my message is, if your body is not responding quickly, or if you're getting worse, then that's a signal to stop and to do something else, or to do, to pull back. But I think to the extent, one of the reasons why I started my membership site was to give people access to somebody who can teach them. So not everybody can afford to work with a practitioner directly. And so, that's when I started direct nutrition support. It was to give people access to me, so they can ask questions, so they can troubleshoot, so they can learn on their own, very inexpensively, rather than doing individual consultations, which may not be affordable. So I think finding some way to learn about yourself and about adaptogenic herbs that are a good fit for you is a good use of people's time, because then you have a toolbox. You have a wide range of things that you can turn to when the acute illness comes up. Because like you said, we all, we get sick, we get exposed to different things, different stresses in our life can make us vulnerable. And so if we already know the things that are effective for us and the things that work, then these are good things to have available to us. And then in terms of my own recovery, what I was dealing with was very complex. and I had multiple diagnoses. The list became quite long. And, the good news is that, I'm so different, I think, from where I was, that I'm just not even the same person anymore. I think that even now today, as I said, I have a wellness team. I still work with my chiropractor. I still work with my acupuncturist. I still work with, a lot of the people, that helped me get where I am today. And I'm constantly learning about myself. So, the fact that, I lost so many of those diagnostic labels, is unbelievable, and that I could go from being that sick to where I am today, is really a testament to everything that we did. But I don't think, again, it's any one thing. Nutrition was the foundation for me to get where I am. And that's true for Stephen as well, because we were already doing all of the therapeutic modalities. We were doing physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. And even in myself, I was doing physical therapy. I was doing, acupuncture, chiropractic care, energy healing. There wasn't any therapy I haven't tried or done. I've literally done everything. But nothing was giving me the results until I changed everything about my nutrition, like everything. And got all the pesticides and chemicals out of our diet and removed all the inflammatory foods from our home. And that was a total game changer for us. And that's ultimately when we started realizing that other diseases in other family members were changing. That's when my husband's, breast tumor went away without surgery. He had, his was being triggered by soy. And my other son had chronic eczema, which was being triggered by a small amount of canola oil in a gluten-free pizza we had in the freezer. And he had chronic eczema, so severe that he was bleeding, and I had to take him to an immunologist up in Boston. And, so, the list went on and on and on about all the other things, even other viral undertones of our issues. Like Stephen had autism, but he also had 35 warts on his body, that completely disappeared, gone, like never treated, and they were always there. And that was my indication that there was something viral going on in his body, that we weren't even treating, but because we changed our diet and started using plants and food as medicine, his body cleared that on its own. And so that was when the light bulb started going off in me that, we essentially can restore health by just giving the body the fuel it needs to do what it needs to do. And that's essentially what's happening in all of us, which is
right.
What the film is about. So I would just encourage people to, to watch the film and to see what happened with all of us and our stories. And I think it's, really a journey that we hope to bring people on to inspire them, to see what can happen in their own home.
Right. I'm putting up the link right now. I put up the link for your website. Why don't you give that link verbally so that, other people who listen to this will be able to know where to find you?
Yeah, and they can go onto my website too. That has the trailer as well. And that's my name, Kathleen DiChiara. So it's Kathleen, Kathleen. And the last name is DiChiara, which is DiChiara. And so they can go there and they can look at the trailer. It's also, you can get to it directly by going to secretingredientsmovie.com, which is the official website of the film. And in that film, we talk a lot about, genetically modified foods and switching to organic and switching, getting the foundation of nutrition and really taking a lot of those foods out of the home. And ultimately rebuilding our health from there. So that's sort of the foundation or the nuts and bolts of it. But there's a really beautiful storyline, and there are other people in the film and other stories of infertility and autism and ADHD and endocrine disruption and weight issues and cancer and just so many other people who are having the same experience. So that people can recognize that, our story is really representing a much broader issue, and it's not just happening to us, that other people are also having this experience. Yep.
And all this, now, Jeffrey Smith is the one who's doing the documentary from Institute of Responsible Technology. He also
he's one of the producers. Yep.
He also did Genetic Roulette, and he's a big advocate for organic foods. Mm-hmm. He's always putting that out. So, considering that Jeffrey Smith is involved in this documentary, I'm just wondering, all the people who were in it, did they all go towards organic foods?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's very interesting. Here we're dealing with fertility issues, dealing with cancer, we're dealing with autism. You were paralyzed.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Paralyzed?
Mm-hmm.
Are you paralyzed now?
No, I'm not.
So you can walk?
Yeah.
Now, how incredible is that?
Yeah.
All because of going?
Yeah. Well, because of restoring the body. I think, one of the messages that I like to leave people with is that, there isn't this simplistic way of saying, if you don't get a vaccine, you don't get autism. If you don't eat GMO foods, you don't get sick. If you don't eat organic, or if you do eat organic, you can heal yourself of all. I mean, this is, we can't look at things in isolation like that. So it just doesn't work that way, right? And we'd like it to be that simple. We'd like there to be a single cause, a single reason why somebody recovers, okay? But I think more importantly, we could effectively argue that it's very difficult to get well when you're bringing pesticides and chemicals into the body. So you're putting an added burden onto a sick body. And it's very difficult for the body to get everything it needs to get well. And so that was our experience, that the removal of the genetically altered foods and the glyphosate and the pesticides and the chemicals allowed our body to use the nutrients, the minerals, which we don't manufacture. People completely have no idea, including myself. This was true for me more than anybody. I had no nutritional understanding, no basic understanding of how things work. I did not know that my body did not manufacture minerals. I did not know that they came from the soil. I did not know that if there was no bacteria in the soil, which pre-digests the minerals in the soil, that then the plant uptakes through the root, and then it's in the plant, and then we eat the plant and get the minerals. I had no idea that that process even took place, and that if I wasn't giving my body those minerals, that I had multiple enzymatic functions in the body that weren't even working. I mean, we have 1,500 enzymes, 300 of them require zinc. And where do we get zinc? From the soil. Where do we get it? From plants, from certain foods, pumpkin seeds and legumes and leafy greens. And, there's all of these things that people just are not recognizing. So we can look at mineral deficiencies or nutrient deficiencies, and we can actually make an argument that you can have, if you look at a disease pattern, it mimics that of a nutrient deficiency. So if we look at manganese or magnesium or zinc,
right,
and we say, what are the symptoms if somebody is completely deficient in that mineral? And it can be a very long list of something that looks exactly like a disease. And so the argument that I had for myself was, well, how do I know that the restless leg syndrome and the chronic pain and the fatigue and the vision difficulty and the brain fog and the fibromyalgia and Stevens learning challenges and how do I know what's being caused by the foods, the things that we are missing, completely missing from our diet, and what things are actually being caused by complete dysfunction in the body? I couldn't even make sense of it. So I said, well, I'm not going to keep bringing in foods covered in pesticides and glyphosate, which is a registered antibiotic, which is depleting my body of these nutrients. It's like filling up a tub with a hole in it. I'm not going to keep bringing food in and then having it leak out because, of all the chemicals on top of it. So where do I get my baseline? How do I get myself to a place where all of the things that I'm bringing into the body are effectively working, for every system of the body, for the methylation system, for my enzymes, for digestion. And so that was like really critical to me to get some sort of a baseline. And it was dramatic. I mean, this was not, we were having profound changes, in a very short amount of time. And then every single day, year, week, I mean, it just got better and better and better, to the point where we noticed, the kids weren't getting sunburns because, they had rich, healthy fats in their diet. They had essential oils, like omega, 3, 6, and 9. They were eating more, protective plants. They were eating fruits and blueberries and lots of leafy greens. And, we had just taken so many of the processed foods out, and so many of the foods they were eating were very rich. And I think that it was having a profound effect on their vision, on their skin, on their sleep, on their mood, on their learning. They get straight A's, both of my kids that are in grade school, and then I have a kindergartner. So even the learning was dramatic, their ability to process information quickly and to learn it. And again, this was not the pattern. This was not what we had been seeing in those early years. Everything was a struggle. Everything. We had to work so hard at everything, and everybody was struggling in some area. So, you can't really break it down and say one thing gets rid of another or one thing causes another. You just have to look at everything being a whole body disorder or a whole body support, and make sure that you are doing everything you can to have a strong, resilient, vital body. And then, the majority of the complaints that people will have and the diseases will be less of an issue. I mean, that's really what I want to encourage people to do. And you don't have to go to some, ancient forest to get some special remedy. I mean, the food is right in front of us. It is some of the easiest foods that we can get access to. All of our berries, apples, celery, leafy greens. These things are really hard to get into young kids today, because the biggest complaint people have is that kids are picky eaters. But one of the causes of being a picky eater is a zinc deficiency that I just talked about.
Really?
Zinc depletion. Well, it changes the palate. And so, what depletes zinc in the body is obviously soil depletion, which would be caused by, the pesticides, but also, sugar, which can deplete minerals in the body, but also, grains. So people will, say my kid only likes bread, and macaroni. And that is sort of this vicious cycle that people end up in, because the grains have phytic acid, which can bind to minerals in the intestine, and then it blocks the absorption of them. So essentially what happens is like putting, the grains come in and they're like a magnet, and so they kind of bind to the minerals and deplete the body, and then the child doesn't want to eat anything leafy green. So if you want your children to eat vegetables, fruits and vegetables, you have to get the processed food out. You have to stop the grains, the gluten and the dairy and the yogurt and the cheese and grilled cheese and pasta and, all the foods that they absolutely love. And once you do that, it's a complete game changer. And everyone will say, well, they won't eat anything. And that's true. As long as you keep bringing that food in, they'll never eat anything else, ever. And I know it firsthand because we did it too, and it's not easy. But if you can get through the first day or two, it'll be the best decision you ever made. Let's remove those foods. I'm kind of a tough love girl, I don't like to cookie cut it. I mean, it's, it is a difficult thing to do, but I think managing chronic disease and disabilities and is very difficult. So to me, it was an exchange for a different type of problem, which is getting the kids to eat more things. Initially, actually, when we first started, the way that we started changing, our plan at home was we did a 30-day challenge. And I just said to the kids, we're going to go gluten-free for 30 days. Gluten-free, casein-free, so no dairy and no gluten, which was for 30 days. And I just did a big calendar and we X'd out the days. And I knew that I had no intention on ever bringing them back, but I didn't tell them that because, that would have just been havoc. So we just made it really fun, and we just swapped it out initially. I just used, an organic rice and a gluten-free bread initially, and we just made easy swaps. And then once we got over that hump of, those foods, because at the beginning, gluten-free breads and gluten-free pasta does not taste good when you are an Italian child and you grow up, with the real stuff. So they weren't loving it, right? So it's not that they wanted tons of it, but it got us over the hump. We had replacements. It wasn't extreme. We could move to coconut-based, yogurt instead of dairy, and we just made a switch, and that's how we did it. We did it in phases. And then eventually I could phase some of those things out and start bringing other foods in. And it just takes patience and encouragement, and you can do it. Everyone can do it.
I totally agree. And
Yeah.
I'd like to talk more about how we can do that when we get back. I'd also like to discuss more, specifically the ADHD and the ADD. We're going to take a music break right now. You're listening to Will Spirit Radio and Haggy Shack Radio. Please remember we're listener sponsored, so click that donate button and show us some love. And we'll be back right after this music break. Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Life, Live It to the Fullest. I'm your host, Joyce Wheeler. Today is Friday, July 22nd, 2016. You're listening to Will Spirit Radio and Haggy Shack Radio. Remember, we're listener sponsored, so click that donate button and show some love. And I am back with my guest, Kathleen DiChiara. Kathleen, I want to touch on a couple things, and then let's see what you have to say about it. First of all, the mineral deficiency that we had talked about earlier. When you mentioned the zinc, it's funny because my husband was having heart palpitations, and he's a truck driver. He was working nights. It got so bad he ended up going to the emergency room. They stuck the monitor on him for a week. They sent him home saying, "Oh, nothing's wrong, but here, take these blood thinners." Well, I talked to the local herbalist and also another knowledgeable man over at the health store, and he said it's magnesium. You go on magnesium. So he started getting the magnesium in him, and it was helping, but he was still experiencing his heart palpitations. And through his own research, he figured out that it was a zinc deficiency.
Exactly.
So once he started getting the zinc into his body, he has not had any heart palpitation since, to the best of my knowledge.
Right.
So one of our problems is we're very mineral deficient. And the thing is too is, I know with me, before we switched to organic foods, it was like I'd always watched what I ate. I was similar to you. I was watching the foods that I was eating. I was exercising on a regular basis. I knew just exactly what to do for my body to maintain my health at the state where I was. And all of a sudden I am hungry. I'm like, why am I so hungry all the time? And then when I started finding out about the ingredients that were in our food and how toxic they were, I realized that my body wasn't craving more food. It was craving the minerals that it wasn't getting. And then once we switched the types of foods we were eating, then I was able to go back into the pattern that I had lived for since I was 17, actually. Yeah. So that was really good.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Joyce, because the amount of food that I eat in a day is so small relative to what I used to eat, and I'm so full all the time. Right.
So a couple of things I want to touch on. Somebody wants to know about dark chocolate, why it's beneficial. Yesterday when we talked, we had talked that you mentioned something about eating certain foods to reduce the pesticides and insecticides within our body. I'm wondering if that includes glyphosate. So I'd like to talk about that. And I'd also like to talk about the various issues with the ADHD and the ADD that kind of like we touched on yesterday is as far as why this exists within our children. So whichever one's the shortest, let's start with that and work our way down to the longest.
Yeah, well, it's all sort of one thing. I mean, I think we like to think of these things as separate issues, that ADHD is a separate issue from what we're talking about, whether we're talking about, what are the compounds that make chocolate healthy and why would somebody be mineral deficient and what are those foods and how do we break down pesticides? It's all the same thing. It's essentially no matter what the disease pattern is or what the dysfunction is in the body, how you resolve that is the same. Now, are there certain components that people with ADHD or ADD or trouble focusing or cognitive issues are more likely to experience? Yes, and we can go over those, but for the most part, the idea is to just support the health of the whole body, and whatever the presentation of that dysfunction is, that will resolve. So sometimes we think that in the instance of your husband, a zinc and magnesium deficiency can lead to heart palpitations in him. It can lead to a severe disorder in somebody else, completely unrelated. Could be a headache, could be joint pain, could be other forms of inflammation. It can be learning challenges. So, they're two different people, and the presentation of that deficiency can be unique to that individual. So that's the other thing. It's not as if, zinc only leads to, and even in Stephen's case, Stephen was wearing a heart monitor when he was young, and it was as if he was laying in bed, and it was as if he had just run a marathon. And he was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and his heart rate was so bad, beating so fast and so hard, it was as if it was coming out of his body. And he would say it hurts. I mean, and I would think he was having cardiac arrest. And so we used to strap the monitor on and call up the nurse and put the monitor through the system. And it was an automated system that read his heart rate immediately on the spot. And there was a cardiac nurse on the other end. And I'm saying, this is what I'm saying. It was never just one thing. It was never just, it's autism, it's a speech disorder, it's a language disorder, or it's cognitive dysfunction, or, he had mitochondrial dysfunction, he had digestive issues. There were lots of things happening, and we used to think of them as separate issues. It was all the same thing. It was just presenting in different ways, but in essence, we didn't isolate each of those individual disorders and treat them. We just supported his whole body, and then his whole body recovered. That's the difference. So things like zinc deficiency too, one easy thing for people to incorporate. Pumpkin seeds are very rich in zinc, and that's an easy thing for people to get in. You can make your own granola bars at home. You can just take a cashew butter or an almond butter and put sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds in it, and a little bit of cacao, which is the chocolate powder, and we'll talk about the benefits of chocolate. And you can, and a little bit of pure maple syrup or honey and coconut oil, and mix it in a big container, and then put it into a dish and put it in the freezer, and it will freeze into a nice granola bar, almost like a raw what do I want to call it? Brownie. We call them raw brownies here, but very easy. So you can just take these healthy, rich foods and medicinally, bring that together.
It's funny you mentioned cacao because they were just talking about cacao in the chat room.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were. And they mentioned brownie. And when I was at the farmer's market Sunday, there was a woman there who actually made, chocolate. She called it chocolate. It tasted like a brownie to me, the texture and whatnot, but she used black beans that she made it with.
Oh yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, definitely. Oh,
and I know,
many.
I've seen
we have so much information now on the internet that, I didn't have when I was really trying to figure things out, but today it's just, there's an endless supply of, great ideas and inspiration online for different ways to make it.
Right. Sure. So let's talk about the ADHD and the ADD, because we were talking about that yesterday. You were saying that a lot of those issues deal from various things like lead.
Yeah. So before we move on to that, and I'll talk about that in 1 minute, is the fact that with the cacao, because we just brought that up in the dessert. So the chocolate, the benefits of chocolate most people are craving is the magnesium, because magnesium, much like zinc, has huge functions in the body, and it can be very easily depleted, particularly for athletes or if you're sick, for many systems and functions in the body. I think the number is over 300. And so we really want to be, and the only way you can get it, of course, is again through the soil. So you need a good volume of it. Our soil is already depleted, so most people are already deficient. So when we're craving excess chocolate, but of course you want over 70% cacao. You want real chocolate. You want it to be a bitter. So we're not talking about Hershey's chocolate or, a chocolate bar with the milk chocolate. You're talking about a dark, bitter chocolate, which medicinally is very beneficial to the body. So just to clarify that, and for people to, to listen to their body if they're really craving that. And they really just need a small amount. It's not something that you would find yourself overindulging in because it's usually very rich and bitter. In terms of the ADHD.
So what are the health benefits? Wait, let's go back to the chocolate.
Well, you're getting the magnesium.
What are the health
benefits?
Why is
from the chocolate. You're getting the magnesium from the chocolate. That's the health benefit of it. I mean, there are benefits to other, bitters in nature. So chocolate is considered a bitter, much like coffee. So these things can be healthy for the brain. They have high antioxidants in them. But again, it doesn't mean that you should be indulging in lots of chocolate all day, right? So it's small amounts of it in the real form there's nothing wrong with it. In other words, it's not that you should be avoiding chocolate or thinking of it as, a cheat or something that you shouldn't have a lot of. When you're getting over 70% cacao, you're really not taking in it's not high in sugar. So, you're going to have a small amount of it. For ADHD, I think, again, like I said, it's really affecting everything. I think the big issues with ADHD is that people need to start by avoiding MSG, the food dyes, the preservatives, really getting a lot of these agitating foods that we know are irritating to the brain, that are irritating to the body. These need to come out first because they're one of the easiest things to remove. So getting all of the food dyes out and the preservatives and the things. And these are all really in the artificial foods and artificial drinks. So if your kids are drinking Gatorade and other, colored foods, then removing those and switching over to, flavored coconut water or some other alternative. There's many things that people can pick from today that are safe. There are a lot of manufacturers now that are making products available in other stores, and in, bulk variety stores that people can choose from, and getting a lot of those, chemicals out of the food. And then you need to really think about foods that would be driving more of an opiate reaction in the body. So gluten and casein are the top two. So I would encourage people to remove those two foods, and to see how they're affecting the body. I don't know if you're familiar with the opiate reaction in the brain, which is really common for children with autism, but also children with ADHD. And that is the protein.
No, I'm not. Educate us.
Okay. So opiates there's a place in the brain where we would have an opiate reaction, which would be, like the drug, so it would create it's an opiate receptor in the brain. And the gluten and casein and also soy can lead to what we call opiate excess. It can be foggy thinking. It can even be an intensity to pain. It can be a feeling of addiction, irritability, withdrawal. And so it can really trigger a reaction. And I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to remove, breads and dairy products from children with ADHD or, and children on the spectrum is because it can trigger an intense rage because they literally are addicted, because of that opiate receptor. So that is a real challenge for families, and it's an area where people feel like they try it and it gets too frustrating and too difficult for the parents. And it's very upsetting, and it can really trigger this irritability and rage, and so they give up or they go back. And so that's where I think helping to make the transition and using other types of replacement foods can help offset that, because, you're still going to get the irritability and the mood, but you're also not going to get the resistance because now the child is not having the food that they want. And I think it's just important to, to work through and make yourself available and not be frustrated yourself those first couple of days, because it really can be difficult for many parents. And then I think the other big culprit food is corn. I see this over and over again. I'm sure it has a lot to do with the fact that our foods have been genetically altered and we're now reacting to even the organic forms. I think that the number one thing is to not consume corn that is not organic. The reason for that is because the corn has a Bt toxin in the grain, inside the corn. So the seeds have a built-in insecticide, which is meant to irritate and ultimately damage and explode the intestinal lining of the bugs, so that when the bugs eat the corn, they explode. So it's a built-in insecticide. Actually, the corn right now, the corn seeds are a registered insecticide. So we have to keep that in mind and know that each time we bring corn in that is not organic or not non-GMO certified, that we are, in essence, bringing a food in that could potentially be creating havoc inside the intestinal lining. And there is a huge connection between the gut and the brain. And so this is the area of vulnerability for children with ADHD and ADD, because the information is traveling up and down the vagus nerve from the gut to the brain. And that inflammation and the bacteria and, the irritation there and these reactions, these inflammatory responses in the body can be very irritating to the brain. So it's very, very important that we're taking chemicals out, we're taking inflammatory proteins out, like the dairy and the gluten, and we're taking corn out of the diet. Those would be the top things, without a question, that would come out. And I think people, just by doing those, are seeing huge results. And then you work from there, you build from there. But I think that those are very significant, and they're big things. I mean, I'm saying them, as if it's not really a big deal, but for many people, this is the majority of the diet for their children. And so these are huge changes.
I've also heard that removing dairy, at least for a time,
Yeah, I may have said casein. Yeah, I meant dairy is the protein in dairy is casein.
Right. Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't realize that that's what they're reacting to, though. So they'll say, "Oh, I'm on lactose-free milk."
Right.
And lactose is just the sugar molecule. It's just the sugar in the milk. People say that people actually think that they're dairy-free by being lactose-free. So that's why I like to point out that it's casein, which is the protein in dairy, which means all dairy, including lactose-free dairy. It also includes all cheeses and yogurts or anything. And then the other thing is people say, "Oh, well, I'm going to have sheep's milk or goat milk or camel milk or, some other animal milk." And I would encourage people to not be swapping it out for different types of milk products, because again, there are other types of protein structures that people can react to, and just remove it. Even
what I found, what I find interesting is we are the only species on the planet that consumes milk after childhood. Most species, they consume milk as youngins, when babies. Yeah. And then they quit. I mean, you don't see a cow drinking milk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some people can do well on dairy, and I think men do better than women because of the hormones. I mean, you're getting dairy from a pregnant or an animal that's given birth and generally is high in hormones. And I'm not talking about artificial hormones. I'm talking about the hormones naturally occurring in the animal.
Right.
And of course, the milk is making the calf fat and trying to bulk the calf up so that it gets strong. And I think in general, women don't do well on dairy. Some men and some people can digest it well and do well on raw, unpasteurized dairy. I would say that, I'm not a fan of saying anything is good or bad. I like to look at the quality being the best and unaltered. I personally don't consume any dairy, but for that reason, it's not a food that I thrive on. It does create inflammation for me. And I agree with you. I think we have an obsession in this country with white liquid. It's one of those things that people don't want to remove from their diet, and they'll remove anything and everything except dairy. And it's the area of greatest resistance, in the nutrition world. So people will, and mostly cheese, is the area where people struggle.
That stinks because I love cheese.
Yeah, everyone loves cheese. So again,
but I do notice that my body is telling me, and that's the thing too, is I tell people, listen to your body. Our bodies talk to us. Listen to what it has to say. And I listen to my body when body says, don't feed me cheese.
Exactly.
But then there's times where I crave it, especially cottage cheese lately. I'm just like, oh, I want cottage cheese. We have a question.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to know, is it the dairy that's the problem or the RBST, etc.? Would organic dairy be the same?
Well, it depends on what you're dealing with. So RBGH is it's banned in 27 other countries. I think it's still in most U.S. cows, but so buying organic is a better choice. But if you're reacting to the protein casein, which most people are if they're having an immune issue, an allergy, chronic issue, foggy brain, trouble thinking, learning challenges, skin issues, acne, headaches, migraines, inflammation, the list goes on and on and on. It's not that the RBGH is not necessarily the trigger, and organic would still present that same problem for the reason that, Joyce and I just said. It's the casein, it's the protein. So if there is intestinal inflammation and then your body is not breaking down that protein structure, which can look like the same structure as gluten, so they have a very similar protein structure. And in fact, those with celiac often don't do well on dairy for that reason, because from a molecular standpoint, they look very similar in the body. So I would encourage anyone that has any symptoms, which would be the entire population, to remove dairy from their diet at least for 10 days and then to bring it back in. And you can really do that with any food. You can take out, so what I teach in my membership is 10 foods out, 10 foods in, 10 days. And it's a really effective model because I'm not only teaching you which foods are going to come out for the 10 days, but I'm also bringing medicinal foods in that are very easy to get to for 10 days. And you can really challenge the immune system. So the only way you're going to really know whether or not organic dairy is affecting you is to remove it, allow the body to heal and repair the inflammation, which will happen as quickly as 3 days. And then you bring it back in. So 10 days is the sweet spot. On day 11, you would bring the dairy back in, and you would look for any reaction, not just digestive, anything. Skin, rosacea, achy knees, headache, fatigue, mood issues, canker sores in the mouth, on and on. Whatever your reaction is, and you always want to wait 3 days, because a reaction is not necessarily going to be immediate, which is an IgE mediated reaction. That's an instant reaction within 3 hours. Most people are having food intolerance reactions, which are IgG mediated. So it's not a true allergy. It's a different type of reaction in the body, and it can happen up to 72 hours after the exposure to the food. So you can eat a food on Monday night and not have a reaction until Wednesday morning. So it's really important that when you take the foods out and you bring them in one at a time, you wait 3 days before you reintroduce another food. So if you take dairy out, you bring that in on day 11, you wait 3 days, and then you bring in the next food, which might be corn, organic corn, and then you wait 3 days, and then you bring in the next food on the list, and you wait 3 days. And it'll be very clear not only if you're having a reaction, but what the reaction is. Because as I said earlier, each person can have a different reaction than somebody else, even though it's the same food.
Right.
So I might have migraine and somebody else might have acne. But it's still the same food triggering that reaction.
Right. And I think that's why it's important that we listen to our bodies and learn about our own bodies, because we're not all the same. And just like the foods are going to affect us differently, even when it comes to exercising, what I do and what works for me might not necessarily work for somebody else. We're all individuals. We're all unique. and we just have to pay attention to our bodies and to listen to our bodies. Now for me, I know how food reacts to my body 2 days after I eat something.
Yeah.
I could tell if it's a negative effect or a positive effect.
Yes, exactly. That's right. And I think what we talked about a little bit earlier too, that we're really talking about taking, some of the dyes and chemicals and preservatives and some of these inflammatory foods, which I mentioned, gluten, corn, and soy and casein. And by the way, this is nothing new. I mean, it's not like I'm the only person that ever, this is a basic elimination diet. It's been around medically for a very long time. And,
right.
It's a very easy thing to implement, and then to reintroduce. I think the key for me, what I have learned to be effective, is what foods to bring in. Because many people tell you what foods to avoid, and then everyone says, well, what do I eat? And I think if you don't know what to eat and you don't know what foods have medicinal properties in the body, like I'll lead us into, we talked about, when you are having some exposure to chemicals, or you're eating in restaurants and you're getting exposure to pesticides, or potentially you've been exposed to mercury or lead or aluminum. The thing that is going to metabolize or break down pesticides and chemicals and heavy metals is our bacteria. And so one of the most effective ways to help the body rid itself of those things is not only to bring in the medicinal plants that can bind to some of those compounds, but the sauerkraut, fermented foods, kimchi, a lot of the traditional foods that our ancestors used to use, the bacteria in the fermentation will actually eat up the chemicals, will eat the pesticides. So it metabolizes and breaks them down. So this is, again, is what I'm talking about when I'm saying we're building resilience in the body. How do you get your body to do what it needs to do to heal? What are the foods that you can bring in so that it has everything it needs to essentially defend itself? It's because we don't live in a perfect world, and these chemicals are everywhere. And even when we're doing our best to avoid them, it's inevitable. So what are the things that we can do so that when our body gets exposed, it has what it needs to combat it? That's what I'm interested in. I'm saying, how do I get my body to be so resilient and strong that a single exposure is nothing for me, because my body has tools in it, it has the right bacteria, it has gut health, and it has that protection to break those compounds down and get rid of them. My detoxification pathways are working, my methylation pathways are working, my sulfation pathways, all my enzymes are being supported. It's like this incredible gift that we have, this self-healing and self-sustaining, beautiful body that's full of bacteria that is communicating with itself and each other at all times. And we can bring in all these wonderful foods that exist in nature, that grow in nature, and they can really help us to be strong and healthy and healing. So fermented foods is one of those foods that I would highly encourage. And you'll be shocked at how much kids will take to that, because it's very sour. It's like a pickled taste. And my kids will actually crave it more.
Pickles.
Like pickles. And they're craved when, my kids.
No, they were talking about pickles earlier in the chat room, and they were like, no, don't pick up pickles again. Yeah. We have a question. Yeah. Any advice on how to deal with the emotional reactions? I'm feeling them even contemplating changing my diet.
So the question is, so she feels an emotional resistance to the change?
I believe it's a he.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that they're like at the point where it's like, okay, I know I have to do something, but emotionally it's kind of like overwhelming, if I'm correct. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. That's how it sounds to me. It sounds like even just the thought of having to make those changes is taking an emotional toll on this person. But again, and Matt, if I'm not correct, if that's not right, correct me. But that's how it sounds. Okay. Any advice on how to deal with the emotional reactions? I am feeling them, even contemplating changing my diet. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm so glad that he brought that up, because I think it's a very real issue for people. And it's one of the reasons why I think people should not be thinking of this as, I'm going to change everything, and tomorrow or 10 days from now or 5 days from now, I'm going to have it all covered. And I think, Joyce, you know this and I know this. It's slow. It takes time. and you make mistakes along the way, and you build on it. The foundation is to just get as many of the processed foods out, get so many of the foods that are really, destroying the body or not, supporting the body, and remove those from your own home. I like to think of it this way. At the beginning, you're not going to be able to control the outside world, your social experiences, restaurants, and other things. What you can control is what you bring into the home. So you create that safe haven at home. The space at home is a place of healing and restoration. The foods that come in there are nourishing and healthy. And you make a few small changes and then you build from there. You don't try to do everything. We started by just taking food dyes and preservatives like the yellow number 6 and the blue and the red, number 40 and complex chemicals. We really just started with reading some basic labels and getting a lot of the pure crap out. Making sure that if we used sugar, it was organic, making sure that we were not eating genetically modified soy and corn. We knew these were destructive. We didn't want to be part of the experiment. I didn't need scientific studies to prove to me that these foods were dangerous. I knew that they didn't exist in nature. I knew that Mother Nature didn't create them. So I didn't want to be part of the experiment. That was very obvious to me. So I would just say pick a few things that you can change, that you feel capable of changing, and start there. So if you get up every day and have a muffin for breakfast, start by taking gluten out of your diet, because that's probably your biggest assault. If you get up every day and have, yogurt, then take the dairy out of your diet, because it's usually the food that we like the most and the food that we have after we've slept. So we call that the fasting period. And when you break your fast, the first food that you crave is usually the food that you want to avoid. So you would start there. So that would be after you get the dyes and the chemicals out, you start there. And then you just have to work through what it is you're exchanging for. So, for a lot of people at the beginning, there is resistance or fear or emotions tied to those foods, but it's usually something else underneath all of that. So you have to want something else more than you don't want to make changes, if that makes sense. So if it means, like for me, I was afraid I was going to die, basically. I mean, it was that, it was not everybody needs that big of an issue, to make a change. But for me, I really was not well, and I was very scared at where I was headed. So I was very motivated to change and to do something. And I wanted to do it quickly. And I think for other people, you just have to say to yourself, well, what do I really want? Do I want energy? Do I want a different career? Do I want to sleep through the night? Do I want to get rid of this awful disease that I have? You have to figure out what it is that you're exchanging, in replacement for the foods that you're eating, and then go after that. Know that that's what you're really going after, and get support. Work with somebody that can guide you through that as things come up. I just don't think we have to go it alone. I think it would be really effective when somebody can talk us through those things.
Right. There's been talk on the chat while you were talking about that, and somebody said that they should just maybe need to find one yummy alternative recipe to replace a dish that is really good to them right now. Mm-hmm. And then another, then it's not so painful.
That's right.
Somebody else said that, Matt, who had originally asked the question, he says he does a lot of supplementing and detoxing, but he still gets into cravings. And I said, me too, but at the same time, I really feel that, again, listening to our bodies, I feel that when my body's craving something, that there's a reason for it. Yeah. I mean, what are we craving? Are we craving salt? That maybe our body's saying, hey, you're low on salt. You need to get some salt in. And I am not a big salt person. I avoid salt. So, it's just a matter, again, listen to your body. And then somebody came back and said, I felt the same way. They said they removed all wheat and corn products from their home, and it was scary. Mm-hmm. And they said it's been 3 weeks now, and it has been much easier than they thought.
Yeah, exactly.
So, somebody else said I changed my attitude from what had to be denied to what I needed to add. Yes. The things I needed to give up dropped off naturally because the things I added were changing my chemistry. It was really easy.
That's right.
We're so for some people it is really easy, and for others, it's really hard.
I think as that listener just pointed out, and it sounds like we have a really group of great people on the line listening, which is so amazing, and they're also supportive of each other, which I just love. And I think that that's the idea too, that recognize that everyone has probably felt that way. And for some people, when they do start to make that change and bring other foods in, the urges really aren't there because they are starting to experience some of the rebalancing that the body wants. And I think, we also have to recognize that we've created patterns and behaviors, and we all have routines that we've, certain things that we've done for a long time, and certain cravings kind of go along with that. And so it's like breaking up routine and exchanging maybe not just a food for something that, that you're used to, but also a behavior. So if a certain time of day is the time of day that you used to, go to the office reception area and start eating, the M&Ms in the bowl, or whatever the issue is that you're craving, or the habit, create a new routine. Make, that time of day is the day that you go out and do, a walk around the building 3 times, and you listen to your favorite music, or you listen to books on tape, or, sometimes for some people, it's the more they learn. So for me, it was a lot about learning the biochemistry in the body and getting so excited about how effective food could be. I started, attending conferences and, just being a listener, just being a student. And that was really motivating for me. I got really, just super curious. And then I enjoyed doing different experiments and challenging myself in different areas. So there's just so many ways to go about it. And I think that they're all valid, and you have to, get around people that are making that change. And if you have listeners that are struggling with children that have ADHD or other issues, or even adults with chronic disease, go to a conference like Autism One. It's been in Chicago. I think next year it's in Colorado Springs. And people think of that as an autism conference, but what you'll learn, and this is the one of the biggest and international conferences with some of the greatest scientists and minds and biologists and medical experts, is that autism can teach us a lot about every other disease. It really is a manifestation of multiple conditions, and you'll be shocked at how much information is out there in terms of new research and existing research, and all the different things. So get around people who are learning, and, connect with people in your own community, or join groups online, and learn, and just be completely open and excited about it. And then when you make a mistake, don't just move on from there. There is no right or wrong. It's just, it's just learning, really. It's not about criticizing yourself or thinking that you have to start over. You just pick up where you left off. That's the beautiful thing about nutrition and the body, because the body is very forgiving.
I totally agree. Let's see, there was something the gluten thing. I wanted to talk about that for a second, because it's really funny, because I did away with all gluten when I was 17. All right. Mm-hmm. I'm 51 now. Oh, did I say that? Nobody heard that. So just to tell you how many years ago, so at that point when I was doing this, gluten wasn't even talked about.
Right.
But I realized when I ate breads, pastas, pizza, a lot of these things, I realized that it had a really negative effect on my body. Mm-hmm. And I cut them all out. I didn't eat bread for years until I found Ezekiel. Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's so nice to have a sandwich again. I think to myself, I can't have a sandwich because, and I had no idea it was gluten. I didn't know what it was. I just mm-hmm. knew there was something in the bread that was not making my body happy. So it's like funny because I see that now. I'm just like, wow, I was gluten free before it was even a term.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize too that, that the gluten is, that wheat in general is sprayed with glyphosate in the last 6 weeks of harvest.
Nice.
So it is used as a drying agent, to basically allow the farmers to move it through the machinery very quickly. And so it dries down and kills the crop, or dries the crop, I should say. So it's used as a drying, like a defecant. And the problem with that is that I think a lot of people are reacting to gluten that ordinarily wouldn't, because they're reacting to the chemicals on it. The difficulty is that once you create the immune response, if you trigger an immune response to that protein, which technically is really called gliadin, gluten is sort of a slang term for the gliadin protein, the body can remember that immune response. And so even if you never had a sensitivity to that protein, but you developed it because you reacted to the way that the crop was grown or the amount of that protein that's now in wheat, which is significantly higher than what it used to be, which none of us, I don't think there's anybody on the planet that has the amount of digestive enzymes to break down the amount of gluten currently being used to make all of our bread so fluffy. So I think that, it's a difficult food to digest, and then it potentially has the chemical on it, which is creating immune reactions. So you can take it out of the diet, but you may always react to it. Certainly people who have autoimmune type reactions generally almost always react to it, even in an organic form. And Ezekiel bread is not gluten-free, so you are consuming gluten now. It's just in a different type of bread.
So Ezekiel doesn't have gluten, does it?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, I could eat it and I'm fine. Then
Yeah,
how come I could eat it and I'm all right? I don't have the same reaction that I was having to it before, so I could eat the Ezekiel bread.
Yeah, so some people do, because they take it out for so long, the body heals, you get strong, and then the body is able to tolerate it better, and it can digest it and break it down. It's usually made with sprouted ancient grains, but that usually consists of wheat, barley, and rye, which all have gluten in it. So, these are sprouted breads, but, there are some that might be making, ancient grains with the wheat free, but for the most part, most of the Ezekiel bread is by design, has wheat in it, it contains gluten. So I think, that's an experiment that, you may get to a point where you get sick, or you get a virus, or you get inflammation, or you have, a certain traumatic event in your life that alters your body, and then you start reacting to the bread that you tolerated, and that's the point, right? So at different times and stages in our life, it just means that, again, you would listen to your body and recognize that it isn't so black and white. It isn't that, I've been eating this for 2 years and it's been fine, and why is it not fine anymore? But more importantly, I seem to be reacting. I'm not feeling my best. I wonder what it could be. Let me think about the things that I'm eating, change them up, take things out, bring them back in. This is true for even wonderful foods like eggs. Like, eggs are one of the most nutrient-dense foods, and you can, get them from the farm and get them, free-range eggs, organic, and we would consider that in the nutrition world as a superfood. But for many people, particularly if they have a history of viruses, that is a real problem. And it certainly was for me. It was triggering the chronic fatigue. And even today, as strong as I am today, I have to be very careful about rotating them in and out of the diet, and only having them when I have the craving, which means that I probably need more B vitamins. So I bring them in, and I can't do too many. And I can't do them multiple days in a row, or it will bring on the fatigue. Not to the level that it used to, because I'm able to stop, but for me, it does trigger that reaction. And it is a problem for many, many people, even though it's considered a wonderful food. So we want to lose that notion that, things are good or bad. The question you want to ask yourself is this food good for me? And is it good for me at this time? Not, was it yesterday? Not, will it be tomorrow? Will I eat this next year? And it's never a life sentence. So you wouldn't want to say to yourself, I can never have bread again. You might say to yourself, I'm going to take it out and see how I feel. And then I'm going to bring it back in if I want to bring it back in, or when that time is. It might be 6 months. It could be 6 weeks. It could be 2 years. It could be 10 years. Whenever I feel like I just have to have it. And if I don't feel well after I have it, then I'm going to take it back out. for me, if I was going to have
Right.
gluten, I'd be in Italy. I mean, I'm not going to eat the crap that they sell, here. Like, if I was going to try it, I'd be indulging. I would really want to enjoy it. But I know
So
that
what
for me, it's
bread,
probably not a good choice.
so as far as bread goes, is there bread in your household? And if so, which one and why?
So I don't eat bread. The kids have a gluten-free bread that we would use for French toast. And then we use an organic rice wrap, for my son to take to camp. We do like a veggie burger with vegetables and onions and hummus, and then he does a wrap, and it's made with rice and water. So it's kind of really just carrying the ingredients of what he's eating, the veggie burger. But I don't do bread. And then again, like I said, if the kids have, French toast or something, they would have, they would just have a gluten-free bread. Not because it's healthy or I think that they should be having French toast, but because kids enjoy eating breakfast foods, and if I'm going to give them toast, I'm going to sop it in some farm eggs and give them the extra protein. But my husband and I don't eat it. I would say my husband probably has it with the kids. But that would be the extent of it. We don't do sandwiches. And then we just do for pasta, we do the Jovial brand, which is just organic rice, and it's an Italian company. So it's the only pasta we would use in this house because it has the consistency and the texture of a wheat-based.
What brand did you say it was?
It's called Jovial, Jovial. And it's an Italian company. Their daughter had celiac, so they created it, so.
Well, and that's one thing that when we go shopping that we look for is certain products that come from Italy or
Yes.
Greece or places that, we feel that we're safer with.
Right.
So we have 3 more minutes. Do you just want to briefly tell people what you do, how you can help them, and where they can reach you?
Sure. So what I would love to see is I'd love to see people, joining our community and learning together, because much like you were doing tonight in the chat room and really supporting each other and sharing ideas, I think it's so powerful when people can really come together in that way. So you can go to my website, KathleenDiChiara.com. My direct nutrition support is the membership-based support. It's $29 a month. You get all of the learning modules, which teaches you everything about the self-healing, and then you get access to me every other week on a live call. You can ask me any questions, and you get access to recipes and a whole downloads, tons of information. And so that's something, and you can discontinue at any time. There's no obligation. If you just do it for a month, you can do it for a month. You can do it for 2 months, 6 months, a year, as long as you want, or as little as you want. And then the documentary is on there. My book, The Hidden Connection, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And then I speak all over the world in the United States. And so I usually post my events on social media. You can look on Instagram under Road to Health, or you can look on my website and I'll post events there. So you can always get access to me to hear lectures or to get information that way. And I would say just, keep in touch and let me know how I can help you and what things you need. I have the tendency to respond to the areas where people feel they're struggling, and that's really where I want to help people the most.
Great. So if they just wanted to contact you, should they go to your website? And what about Facebook? Our listeners, people like to follow people on Facebook.
Yep, they can do that under my business domain, which is my name also. So if you look up Kathleen DiChiara, you'll see my personal page, and then you'll see a business public figure page. So they can like that page and they can reach out there, and I post recipes and links and articles and handouts there. And yep, they can contact me through my website. And then, certainly they can reach out by email, at roadtohealth@gmail.com. And it's a number 2, and the spelling of Road to Health is like Rhode Island, RHODE, number 2, health@gmail.com. So if people want to send a a direct email to me, they can.
I'm on Facebook, and I've got 2 pages for you. One for the Hidden Connection, another one for Public Figure.
Public Figure, yep.
Public Figure. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. And this has been It's Your Life. Live it to the fullest. I'm your host, Joyce Wheeler. And my guest has been Kathleen DiChiara. It is July 22nd, 2016. It's on a Friday. Please remember that Haggy Shack Radio and Wolf Spirit Radio listener sponsored. So show some love and click that donate button. And if you want to sign up for the newsletter to find out which guests are on every week, go to itsyourlifemag.com and sign up to subscribe. So thank you all for listening. You all have a great night, day, morning, whatever it is you're.
You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.